Raven felt the mating call before she understood she had heard it. It moved through the oath chamber like pressure before a storm, low and resonant, old enough that no one in the room needed words to interpret it. 312 summit delegates had been speaking over one another a breath earlier, old clan grievances wrapped in ceremonial politeness, and every voice dropped at once. The silence that followed carried weight. She could feel it in her ribs. King Alistair Ironhold stood on the raised blackstone dais with his hand on the wolf-carved rail, broad shoulders squared, face unreadable to anyone who did not know him. Raven did not know him. She knew only the stories, the ruler of the 9 clans, the alpha whose word could end blood feuds and start wars in the same hour. His eyes were on her. Her pulse jumped for reasons she refused to name. She searched his expression for political intent and found only focus, direct and unblinking. The delegates had already started turning, one by one, looking toward the woman they assumed had been called. Raven looked over her shoulder to find that woman. No one stood behind her. Lyra Thorne, stationed 2 rows down among the attendants, stared up with both hands clenched around her writing slate, as if she had forgotten how to breathe. Chancellor Dane Elir, who had placed Raven near the dais for clerical record duty, went pale in a way that made his rigid posture briefly collapse. Even the Moonmere envoys, silver-sashed and carefully neutral, stared with predatory stillness. Raven's stomach dropped. She knew what the call meant to ranked wolves. She knew what it signaled in law, in instinct, in politics. She also knew what happened to women like her when powerful men made public gestures that were never meant for them. She lowered her eyes, stepped back, and moved toward the side corridor before anyone could stop her. By the time she reached the cold gallery outside the chamber, voices had risen behind her in a wave, first confusion, then outrage, then the bright metallic note of opportunity. Her hands shook against the stone wall. She pressed her palms flat and forced her breathing into even counts. The call had not been for her. It could not have been for her. He had probably been signaling a political bride, or opening a ritual for Moonmere's princess, or issuing some old clan command she had not learned because she was born low and trained for ledgers, not thrones. Inside, someone shouted her name anyway. She left the gallery and kept walking until she reached the archive stair, where the cold smelled like old parchment and candle smoke. The summit had just tilted onto a new axis, and she was already planning how to disappear before the wheel crushed her. 4 years earlier, in 1469, the last time a room full of wolves had looked at Raven as if she mattered, she had stood on a different platform under different lights and learned exactly what public judgment felt like. The Winter Bond rite in Starfall territory had been held in the old amphitheater ringed with white banners, the kind of ceremony families treated as sacred because it confirmed rank and alliance in one binding moment. Raven had been 18, too hopeful, and still naive enough to think private promises might survive public pressure. Kellen Voss, handsome, patient, ambitious in ways she had mistaken for discipline, had been named her bonded candidate by both houses 6 months earlier. He took her hand for the opening vows. He let the priestess begin the rite. He waited until witnesses from 6 houses had assembled, then released her fingers and addressed the crowd instead of her. He told them he could not bind with an Omega from a house in decline. He told them duty required he seek a higher-ranking match. He said her name with formal courtesy while stripping her place in front of everyone who had taught her to trust him. The priestess did not intervene. Her Aunt Myera Starfall watched from the regent seat and did nothing. Raven had held her posture through the end of the ceremony because collapsing in public would have given them a second spectacle. She walked off the platform without crying and did not return to the main hall for 3 days. After that, she did what wounded women in fragile houses were expected to do. She made herself useful. She stopped asking for anything that could be denied. The winter after that rite, House Starfall lost 2 trade lines and most of its guard funding. Mara took regency control, citing emergency powers. Raven became a clerical ghost in her own family keep, sent where ledgers were heavy and voices stayed low. By 1473, at age 22, Raven could catalog tribute inventories for 8 regions from memory, reconcile patrol grain allocations against snow loss projections, and sleep through political shouting because none of it ever changed her status. She was still an Omega in court language, still tolerated and never consulted. That was why Myera sent her to Ironhold Summit in Highwinter as a clerical substitute. Starfall's senior steward had taken ill. The summit required each house to maintain a records delegate, and Raven was expendable enough to travel through blizzard roads if something went wrong. Lyra Thorne volunteered to go with her as attendant, claiming she did not trust Ironhold kitchens and trusted Starfall politics less. Lyra had been Raven's friend since childhood, sharp-tongued, observant, and impossible to intimidate unless someone threatened Raven directly. The road to Ironhold took 5 days. The closer they came to the capital, the more obvious the hierarchy became. Clan standards lined the approach walls by rank order. Guards at each gate wore insignia that displayed bloodline before office. Even the innkeepers in outer districts measured travelers with one glance at wrist marks and shoulder pins. Raven wore none of the marks that commanded automatic respect. She carried Starfall's clerical satchel, a temporary crest token, and a letter from Myra authorizing record access. She kept her chin level anyway. Ironhold Citadel rose from black cliffs above the river, all iron-veined stone and winter banners snapping hard in the wind. The summit had drawn delegates from every clan under Crown authority, all 9 represented with full retinues. Corridors that normally held disciplined quiet now throbbed with quiet rivalries, perfume over steel, smiles sharpened for negotiation. The first signal of Alistair's gravity reached Raven before she saw him. People adjusted themselves when his name crossed a room. Conversations shortened. Guards shifted from ceremonial stance to true readiness without visible instruction. Chancellor Dane E. Lear met Raven at registration with an expression that suggested he considered deviation a moral failing. He was lean, gray-haired, and precise to the point of discomfort, a man whose loyalty belonged to process before personality. He checked her documents twice, frowned at Myra's compressed authority seals, and assigned her to oath chamber records 3 tiers closer to the dais than clerical substitutes usually stood. "This placement is temporary," he told her. "House Starfall's account ledgers require immediate clarification in open session." Raven accepted the slate packet and bowed. She did not ask why he had chosen her, rather than moving the task to a ranked scribe. He did not explain that he had reviewed her prior reconciliations and trusted her accuracy more than her house. The summit opened with tribute disputes and patrol corridor revisions. Raven recorded claims, counterclaims, and oath language while trying to ignore the royal seat at the center of every exchange. Alistair Ironhold chaired from the dais with detached concentration, letting clans exhaust themselves before cutting through argument in 2 sentences. He was 31, older than the younger delegates and younger than the council elders, his authority grounded in the kind of control that made loud men quiet down without being told. Raven looked at him when protocol required and away when it did not. His presence did strange things to room temperature, or maybe to her pulse. She blamed exhaustion. Late in the second session, a dispute over winter grain allotments turned ugly. House Redpine's speaker altered figures to divert stores from lower-rank villages toward a favored patrol company. The falsification was clumsy enough that Raven caught it while transcribing, and felt the old calculation rise in her throat. Stay silent and keep her position, or speak and invite punishment from men whose rank outranked her existence. She stood before she could rethink it. "The corrected transfer leaves Frost Hollow short by 12 carts," she said into the chamber's heavy quiet. "If the storms hold for 2 more weeks, Children there will ration bark meal. Three heads snapped toward her in immediate offense. Red Pine's speaker demanded her name and rank with open contempt. Raven gave both, then repeated the numbers without shaking. Alistair did not look at Red Pine. He looked at Raven for 3 long seconds that felt like a held blade. "Submit your source ledger," he said. She stepped forward, presented the document, and braced for dismissal. He scanned it once, signed a reversal order, and reassigned Grain under Crown authority. Red Pine protested. Alistair cut the protest off by citing winter survival law. The chamber moved on. The obstacle Raven had faced was simple and ugly. Fear had kept her silent in every room since 1469, and speaking in that chamber made intervention possible for people she would never meet. She returned to her station with her throat burning and every instinct warning that visible courage often collected penalties after the applause died. Lyra cornered her at supper and hissed through clenched teeth, "You are either very brave or very reckless." "I had numbers," Raven said. "You had enemies the second you stood up." Lyra's warning proved accurate by morning. House delegates who had ignored Raven now tracked her movement. 2 stewards blocked her access to the North Archive until Chancellor Dane intervened with clipped fury. An anonymous note appeared under her door. "Clerks who overstep vanish in mountain snow." Raven burned it and kept working. Alistair's reactions during that day remained deniable. He reassigned guard rotations near archive corridors without stating why. He requested Starfall account updates directly from Raven instead of through Mayera's senior staff. He cut off one counselor who referred to her as the Omega Clerk in a tone that implied property. Raven read every move as surveillance. Powerful men did not pay this kind of attention unless they had identified a liability. On the 3rd summit day, the Oath Chamber convened for high alliances, including Moonmir's Military Renewal Pact. That treaty carried 6 years remaining on its current term, and every strategist in the room understood what continued support meant for border stability. Moonmere cavalry had held eastern passes through 2 bad winters. Losing them would shift risk onto Ironhold households already stretched thin. Raven took her assigned position, closer than she liked, with Chancellor Dane 2 steps behind and Lyra lower in attendant row. Alistair entered in formal black with the crown torque at his throat, expression carved from duty. The chamber rose. Formal recitations began. He listened through 3 treaty clauses, then his gaze found Raven with unsettling precision. Something tightened in his jaw, a flicker gone before she could read it. The room held stillness for one breath. Then he gave the mating call that froze every ranked wolf where they stood. The cold open had not lied. That moment split the summit. Raven withdrew because retreat was the only action that had ever kept her safe after public mistakes. She reached the archive stair before Lyra caught up. "Raven," Lyra said, voice low and fierce. "He looked right at you." "He looked through me," Raven answered. "Kings do not call clerical substitutes." Lyra swore under her breath. Every ranked wolf in that room knew what it meant. "I am not ranked in any way that matters." She shoved shaking hands into her sleeves and chose invisibility over humiliation. The hesitation she resolved in that stairwell was the one that had ruled her since 18. If she stayed near public judgment, she would relive the rite, and leaving made avoidance possible even while danger grew. The danger arrived before sunset in Kellen Voss's smile. He met her in the lower library passage as if by chance, polished boots dry despite the snow outside, Starfall token displayed where she could not miss it. Time had turned him sharper. The charm remained, now lacquered over calculation. "Raven," he said softly, "you always did know how to stand at the center of storms." She should have walked past him. She stopped, because old wounds sometimes reached for closure even when reason objected. "You should not be in this corridor," she said. "I am here on Starfall advisory work," he replied. "Your aunt requested my assistance." Of course she had. Mara trusted ambition when it served her. Kellen lowered his voice. The king's call has set half the summit on fire. If you are wise, you will issue a statement denying claim intent. I can help draft it. Raven read the offer for what it was: control disguised as rescue. I did not make a claim. Perception creates claims. You know that better than anyone. His gaze slid over her shoulder toward the archive doors, measuring. She felt the old instinct to appease and shut it down. I will speak through Chancellor Ilir. Kellen's smile thinned. Procedure will not protect you from hungry people. He left her with that warning and the sour recognition that he still understood exactly where to press. He had targeted Raven again for the same reason he used in 1469. Her public diminishment advanced his rank, and this time her proximity to the crown threatened the seal fraud network that financed his climb. What she did not know yet was that he had already solved his larger obstacle: access. Mara had granted him temporary custody review over Starfall seal logs 2 days earlier, giving him the records needed to forge orders in Raven's name. By midnight, forged directives bearing Starfall seal impressions began circulating among minor delegates, suggesting Raven intended to leverage the mating call to challenge Starfall Regency and force Crown arbitration. The documents were subtle enough to survive casual scrutiny. They painted her as destabilizing, power-hungry, and willing to ignite clan succession conflict during Treaty Week, which gave Kellen room to present himself as Starfall's stable intermediary, while his wider treason contacts stayed buried. Raven learned of them when 2 royal guards escorted her from archive duty to a restricted guest suite under administrative hold. She went cold. Am I charged? Protective confinement pending review, the captain said. Protective for whom? He did not answer. Alistair summoned Chancellor Dane before dawn and demanded source chains for the forged orders. Dane argued for formal sequence review and warned that rushing judgment could fracture summit credibility. Alistair accepted procedure in public and circumvented delay in private, assigning silent trackers to everyone who had handled Starfall seal records. Raven saw only the result: increased scrutiny, fewer freedoms, and Alistair's clipped questions through guarded doors. She interpreted his pressure as preparation for conviction. His first deniable protection came that same morning when Red Pine delegates requested access to interrogate her directly. Alistair denied the request on procedural grounds and relocated Raven to rooms inside the inner ward where attack was nearly impossible without royal permission. His second came when a rumor spread that Raven had bewitched the call. He publicly censured the speaker for insulting crown law. He framed it as defense of legal process. Everyone heard ownership in the tone he refused to name. The gap between what he intended and what Raven believed widened into a chasm that kept both of them bleeding. Lyra was the only person Raven trusted enough to rage in front of. He is managing me like a volatile document, Raven said, pacing the narrow sitting room. Contain, review, discard. Lyra leaned against the window slit and watched snow bury the courtyard steps. I have seen men discarded. This does not look like discarding. You heard his call, not his mind? I heard his call and watched him almost tear the chamber apart when you disappeared. Raven flinched. Do not romanticize power for me. Lyra softened. I am trying to keep you alive. That night, an attack on Lyra resolved the argument for both of them. She was returning from records intake with 2 satchels when someone cut the gallery lamps and shoved her against a balustrade above the lower court. Raven heard the crash from her room, ran toward the noise despite guard orders, and reached the gallery in time to see Lyra hanging by one arm over a 20-foot drop. A masked assailant moved toward Lyra's fingers with deliberate calm. Raven did not think. She charged, hit him shoulder first, and took the knife slash meant for Lyra across her forearm. Pain flared hot. She kept hold of the attacker long enough for guards to tackle him. When captains arrived, protocol pointed at Raven as a security violator who had left confinement. She accepted immediate reprimand to shield Lyra from blame and gave her statement without mentioning Lyra's unauthorized records route. The hesitation Alistair had carried until then was ruthless. He had not known whether Raven's integrity was situational, and seeing her bleed to save a friend made emotional pursuit possible in a way no oath language ever could. He came to the infirmary after midnight, dismissed everyone with one glance, and stood at the foot of her bed while the healer wrapped her arm. "Why did you run toward danger?" he asked. Raven gave him the only honest answer. "Because Lyra was there. You could have died. She would have died first." His face tightened with something she could not read. Concern looked too intimate on a king she barely understood. She looked away first. Across the room, through reflected brass and shadow, Alistair let his control slip for half a breath. He remembered another night in 1471 when a woman he had trusted opened a border gate to enemy riders after swearing loyalty in his private chambers. He remembered smoke over 3 villages, children carried out of ash, and the decision he made before dawn never to place the heart of his rule in another person's hands again. After that betrayal, he refused every political mate proposal put before the throne, and the court praised discipline while he called it survival. Raven's blood on white linen cracked that vow in a place strategy could not reach. He left before saying anything that could not be withdrawn. Investigation accelerated. The masked attacker identified himself as a courier for Kellen under pressure, claiming payment from a Starfall account line authorized by Mara's office. Chancellor Dane verified the transfer trail and discovered ledger alterations that narrowed access to exactly 4 people. Kellen was one. Raven was another. On paper. Dane brought the findings to Alistair and demanded restraint until full evidentiary hearing. Alistair agreed publicly, set a dawn hearing, and privately moved Raven to protected witness status without informing her of the reclassification. She woke to new guards and assumed guilt had hardened. Tension rose toward a near confession 2 evenings later in the observatory corridor, where snowlight spilled through glass and made the whole citadel feel suspended outside time. Raven had been called to review recovered seal impressions. Alistair waited alone. "You are not under charge," he said. She folded her arms to steady herself. "You have not treated me like a free woman. You were targeted. By your court. By men who mistook you for undefended." She held his gaze, stubborn and scared. "I have been mistaken for undefended my entire life." Something shifted in his expression, a crack she almost recognized as grief. "When I called in the oath chamber, I called you." Raven's breath caught. Reflex rose faster than hope. "No. You called rank. You called alliance. You called someone suitable." He stepped closer once, then stopped himself as if crossing that final pace might break more than silence. "I called my mate." The gap nearly closed there. She could have reached for belief. He could have offered the story behind his restraint. Footsteps slammed into the corridor before either happened. Chancellor Dane arrived with guard captain and sealed packet, face set in bureaucratic dread. "Recovered directives from the East Courier Vault," Dane said. "Signed under Raven Starfall's hand, requesting Moonmere contact for claim leverage." Raven stared at the documents and felt the floor tilt. She had never seen them. Her handwriting had been copied with disturbing accuracy. The interruption resolved ambiguity in the worst direction, and separation became inevitable because trust could not stand, while fabricated proof wore her name. Raven was remanded to sealed quarters pending full council review. Lyra was barred from direct access. Kellen requested observer status for Starfall interests and received provisional approval through Mara's petition. Alistair visited once, silent, eyes unreadable. Raven mistook his silence for retreat and braced for abandonment she had predicted from the start. She spent the next day cataloging memory with forensic desperation, searching every task where her hand could have been copied, every ledger where seals were exposed. A single detail unlocked the pattern. In 1472, Mara had ordered a ward maintenance audit and assigned Raven to transcribe old seal custody logs. Those logs included blank impression matrices used for emergency duplicates. Raven had flagged irregular access entries at the time. Mara had dismissed them as clerical noise. If Kellen had seen those logs during his temporary custody review this summit, he could replicate Starfall impressions and fabricate directives convincing enough to pass quick review. Raven requested archive access through Dane and was denied for security. She requested again, citing right of defense under Summit law. Dane hesitated, then granted supervised access for 2 hours with no copies allowed. She found what she needed in Mayera's private adjunct ledger hidden behind grain tariffs, a coded payment register that linked ward sabotage contracts from 1469 to 3 names, one of them Kellen Voss. The entries corresponded to the winter of her bond right rejection. Mara had paid to weaken Starfall boundary wards that season, creating crisis conditions used to justify Regency extension. Kellen's reward line appeared a month later, confirming why he targeted Raven again when the summit call put her near power. She was the one witness who could connect his rise to Mara's covert payments. Raven went numb. The public rejection that had defined her adulthood had never been only personal betrayal. It had been politically useful theater inside a larger seizure of control. She could have hidden the ledger and bargained privately for safety. Exposing Mayera would destroy what remained of family protection. Silence would preserve blood ties while leaving treason architecture intact. The obstacle in front of her was ancient and intimate. She had never testified against kin, and speaking publicly made lawful reversal possible. She asked Dane for immediate council hearing. Council convened at dusk with full witness attendance. Delegates packed the chamber again, drawn by scandal gravity and the still-burning memory of the mating call. Kellen stood in observer row wearing performative concern. Mara arrived in regent colors, posture regal, eyes hard. Raven entered under guard escort and did not lower her gaze. Lyra stood in attendant tier where she could be seen. Dane opened proceedings with procedural recitation and introduced exhibit chains. His voice stayed neutral until he reached the claim validation question and turned towards the dais. For record clarity, he said, I confirm I placed Raven Starfall near the dais during oath session by my order. From that assigned line, I had an unobstructed view when His Majesty directed the mating call toward her station. This is my sworn witness statement under claim law. Murmurs hit the chamber like wind through dry branches. Dane had just converted rumor into admissible fact and anchored the core point no faction could erase. Raven presented Myra's ledger, translated the code aloud, and linked each payment to seal access windows and forged directive circulation. She testified that trauma from her 1,469 rejection had made her misread the call and retreat, opening operational space for Kellen's frame-up. The admission cost her dignity and gave the chamber an explanation no one else could provide. Kellen attacked her credibility immediately. He framed her as wounded, unstable, desperate for elevation. Mara denied ledger meaning and called the code obsolete accounting shorthand. The council stalled an argument until Alistair rose. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Moonmere's support under current treaty term remains 6 years, he said, eyes moving across the chamber. That support was negotiated on assumption of court integrity. Integrity has failed under my roof. Moonmere's envoy stiffened, understanding where this was heading. Alistair continued. Ironhold law permits kingly mate declaration before clan witnesses. I gave that call. I affirm it now. Raven Starfall is my chosen mate under crown law. The chamber erupted. Opposition came instantly from Alliance conservatives, who saw status mismatch as strategic weakness. Moonmere's envoy demanded clarification on treaty implications. Alistair gave it with brutal clarity. I release Moonmere from oath-bound military obligations effective tonight. Ironhold will bear the border cost without borrowed loyalty purchased through a marriage market. The price landed like iron. Breaking an oath-bound pact meant immediate military support loss, no grace period, no quiet transition. He had just traded 6 years of guaranteed cavalry reinforcement for a claim no council could dismiss as convenience. The hesitation that defined his reign since 1471 had been fear of attachment as a weapon, and this choice made devotion public while making political conflict unavoidable. Raven felt the old wound rise, expectation that power would still choose safety over her when pressed, and watched it fail in real time. He had chosen in the most expensive language his world respected, visible cost. She still had to choose in return. Council recessed for legal determination while guards detained Kellen and Mara pending verdict. Raven waited in the side antechamber with Lyra, hands cold, heart slamming hard enough to hurt. Alistair entered alone after midnight, removed Crown Torque, and set it on the table between them as if laying down a shield. "I will not command your answer," he said. "Claim law gives me authority. Bond law still asks consent." Raven studied him. This man built from control and old damage, this king who had finally shown where he bled. "If I accept, border households lose Moonmere riders because of me. They lose borrowed riders because I refuse to trade you for policy. If I accept, every house that dismissed me will call this manipulation. They can call it what they like while bowing to it." Lyra squeezed Raven's shoulder once and stepped out, closing the door. Raven's fear spoke first. "At 18, I was rejected in front of everyone who mattered. I built my life around never standing where I could be refused again." Alistair did not flinch. "In 1471, I trusted the wrong person and buried villages because of it. I built mine around never needing anyone again." The symmetry hit her with quiet force. Two survival structures facing each other across a table, both expensive, both lonely. She drew one steadying breath. The obstacle she had carried since that rite was belief that choosing openly guaranteed abandonment, and choosing him now made partnership possible with full knowledge of risk. "I choose you," she said, "not because you are king, because you saw me when silence was safer." His eyes closed for half a second, relief and grief and hunger crossing his face so quickly she almost missed it. When he reached for her hand, he moved slowly enough to let her refuse. She did not. Verdicts came at dawn. Council accepted ledger evidence, courier testimony, seal chain analysis, and Chancellor Dane's sworn witness statement confirming Raven as the called line in the oath chamber. Kellen Voss was convicted of treason conspiracy, attempted murder through proxy, and document forgery under Summit law. Sentence: life imprisonment in the Northern Hold with no appeal for 10 years. Mara Starfall was stripped of regency and titles, then ordered into clan exile beyond Starfall jurisdiction. She left the chamber without looking at Raven. Chancellor Dane remained in office after formally conceding Raven's legitimacy in written decree, adding his own witness statement to permanent record so no future faction could revise the claim event. He also sealed Mayera's private ledger and its verified code key into Crown Archive, and that certified record became the legal proof that reordered Starfall succession. Lyra received appointment papers that same week, sworn lady to the crownmate, with full access rights previously reserved for ranked houseborn attendants. She accepted while pretending not to cry. The bond rite was scheduled for first thaw in spring 1474, giving courts time to absorb succession implications and military command, time to reallocate border defense without Moonmere support. Those months were not easy. Alistair's treaty break invited pressure from rivals who sensed strategic opening. Border captains doubled rotations. Treasury officials recalculated supply burdens with painful precision. Raven did not disappear behind curtains while men absorbed consequences. She sat in defense councils, reviewed ration ledgers, and proposed redistribution routes, drawn from her years as the ignored clerk who had learned where shortages truly began. Some commanders resisted taking guidance from a newly claimed mate with Omega history. Alistair required compliance once, then let results do the rest. When her winter corridor plan reduced East Pass delays by 6 days, resistance lost language. The story circulating through lower quarters shifted. She was no longer the woman accidentally called in a crowded summit. She was the queen mate designate who knew grain math and remembered servant names. Private life unfolded in careful increments. Alistair remained sparing with speech in public, short declaratives that carried command. In private, he adapted, asking where he once ordered, explaining where he once assumed obedience. Raven noticed every adjustment and offered her own, naming fear before it hardened into withdrawal, asking for clarity when silence threatened old misreadings. One storm night in late thaw, she asked the question that had lived under their conversation since the antechamber. "Who betrayed you in 1471? He answered without evasion. Lady Saris of House Vale had courted him during truce talks, gained intimate access, then sold border gate rotations to a raiding coalition. 3 villages burned before Ironhold riders sealed the breach. Saris vanished across sea routes. After Saris, he refused every political mate arrangement brought to him, including treaty-matching pressure from allied courts, because intimacy had become indistinguishable from strategic exposure. Raven took his hand and held it through the telling. He did not pull away. Their formal bond rite in spring 1474 took place in the same oath chamber where the call had shattered her assumptions. This time, Raven entered through the main aisle in crown gray and starfall white, Lyra at her left, Chancellor Dane reading legal confirmations at the rail, including his own witnessed placement record from Summit Day. Delegates from all 9 clans witnessed. No one could claim ambiguity. Alistair spoke first in ritual language and then in his own. "I claimed in instinct and in law. I choose again in full knowledge." Raven answered with equal steadiness. "I was taught to accept what I could keep hidden. I choose what can be seen." The bond settled through both of them with a physical finality that felt like home and risk intertwined. No erasure of old wounds, only a different future built around truth rather than avoidance. Crowd response rolled through the chamber in layered waves, formal acclamation first, genuine warmth later, and Raven let herself absorb it without waiting for reversal. Life after claiming looked less like fairy tale and more like work done with aligned purpose. Border strain from Moonmere's exit remained real, so Raven helped establish winter reserve compacts among interior clans, trading ceremonial concessions for practical supply commitments. Alistair backed each agreement with crown enforcement, turning what critics called sentimental weakness into logistical resilience. House Starfall succession was reordered by the same archived ledger evidence that destroyed Myera, and Dane's certification closed every procedural challenge filed against that ruling. Raven declined direct regency and appointed a neutral steward council until younger heirs reached age. That decision prevented a revenge cycle and signaled she would not repeat the power hoarding that had damaged her family. Kellen stayed in northern confinement. Reports from the hold confirmed he spent his first months filing petitions no court would hear. Dane continued to argue procedural minutiae with everyone, including Raven, and she learned to value his rigidity when opportunists attempted to reopen legal questions he had already sealed in record. Lyra transformed sworn lady duties into a protective network that kept vulnerable attendants from disappearing in corridor politics, a quiet reform Raven considered one of their early victories. The memory of the summit call remained bright in Raven's body, less as trauma now, and more as hinge. She still remembered the moment she turned to look for another woman behind her. She could almost smile at it on good days. On hard days, when old doubt returned, Alistair grounded her with plain language. "You hear silence where I have already chosen," he told her once, after a tense council session. She answered, "I learned silence from people who watched me fall." He touched her wrist where the knife scar had faded to a pale line. "I watched you stand up." No audience heard that exchange. It changed her week anyway. By early summer, children from Frost Hollow, the village saved by her first summit correction, arrived at Ironhold with a tribute basket of carved pine wolves. One carving had a chipped ear and stubborn eyes. Raven kept it on her desk. When she looked back across the chain of events, causality felt almost brutal in its precision. Speaking over grain numbers made her visible. Visibility triggered the call and the frame-up. The frame-up exposed the SEAL network. Exposure forced testimony. Testimony made public choice unavoidable. Choice with cost made trust believable. She did not romanticize the pain that built that chain. She respected what it had demanded. At 22, she had arrived as an expendable clerical substitute from a fallen house. She ended the year as queenmate under full law, not because a king's attention fell from nowhere, but because she kept acting from her own moral line when fear argued for silence. At 31, Alistair had ruled through discipline shaped by betrayal. He ended that same year with a mate who challenged his detachment, shared the burden of consequence, and made him something rarer than feared, known. One final ceremony closed the public wound that had begun in 1469. At Winter's first return, Ironhold held a remembrance rite for wrongful public shaming cases across clan records, an old legal form almost never used because powerful houses disliked precedent. Raven requested it. Alistair approved it without amendment. Before witnesses, the Herald read archived summary of Raven Starfall's winter bond right rejection and the council's new finding that political coercion had tainted the event. Formal restitution was entered. No magic erased the memory. Law named what happened and named it wrong. For Raven, that mattered. Afterward, she stood in the emptying hall and felt no urge to run. Alistair joined her with 2 cups of warmed spiced tea, a domestic gesture in a room built for spectacle. "You stayed," he said. "I wanted to see the doors close this time." He handed her a cup. They closed. She leaned against him, small and steady in the vast stone space, and listened to the quiet settle without threat. Their nights were no longer negotiations with fear. Their days still demanded strategy, compromise, and hard decisions for 9 clans that would never become simple. Fulfillment lived in concrete details, shared breakfast before council, his hand finding hers under table when debate turned vicious, her laughter returning in places where she once rationed every sound, Lyra arguing with guards who now pretended to lose on purpose, Dane submitting reports with reluctant respect, border villages surviving winter with full stores. The mating call that once felt like a trap became the first true language of belonging she had ever trusted. She had been the only one in that crowded summit who did not know it was for her. By spring 1474, no one in Ironhold could mistake where she stood, and she no longer mistook it either.